30 years ago, an American researcher brought millet seeds from Taiwan to a food bank in the U.S. Now, Taiwanese researcher Kuo Hua-jen has brought those seeds back home as part of the efforts to ensure a diverse food supply. The seeds' return was met with great fanfare, but there is concern that excitement could fizzle out since millet is not a lucrative crop in Taiwan and there is little motivation to grow it. Kuo and others hope to find ways to add value to the crop to ensure it survives. Here's our Sunday special report.
It's early morning in Nanto's Kalibuan village, and Chen Zhonghe and his family are busy laying their harvest of millet out to dry. The sound of cicadas in the air serve as the symphony of the harvest season. Just as rice is a staple around Asia, millet once served as a staple crop for many of Taiwan's indigenous peoples. Seasons and festivals throughout the year revolved around this mighty crop.
There
are actually many varieties of millet. Some varieties are specifically used at festivals. The alcoholic drinks made from millet also come in different varieties. The sweet variety can be drunk by men, women, young and old alike. There's also a sour variety that only strong men drink, and there's a green variety of millet that may have some medicinal uses.
In the 1960s, there were as many as 160 types of millet grown in Taiwan, which were grown over a combined 6,700 hectares of farmland. Today, only a few varieties remain, and in total, only 120 hectares are used to grow millet in Taiwan. Many types of millet are now lost, reducing genetic diversity. Researchers are worried that this loss will impact Taiwan's ability to deal with climate change.
It has a very important job as part of efforts to resist climate change. The varieties of millet we have now lack some special characteristics.
Gene banks hold plant varieties that are resistant to heat, cold, drought, floods, insects, and other disasters. The more diverse the contents of gene banks are, the more resilient future food supplies will be in the face of climate change. Toward this end, Taiwanese food growers hope to recover older varieties of millet. In the 1970s, American researcher Wayne Fogg visited Taiwan while studying the domestication of grain crops in Asia. Fogg took seed samples from 96 varieties of millet to a seed bank in the US, making it the largest single collection of the varieties in the world.
乌鸦或者这个黑色的意思，因为这个品种它的颜色是黑的。
In 2011, National Taiwan University professor Kuo Hua-jen became aware of this seed bank in the process of his research and learned about the seeds taken by Fogg.
Dear manager, I acknowledge that the NGRL maintains 100 accessions of seeds.
Kuo wrote to the seed bank, and a few months later, these millet seeds crossed the sea again after 30 years.
这个我打开一看，哇，少的200粒。
I opened one of the containers and thought, wow, there's 200 seeds in here. For each variety, there were 200 seeds. They fit in the palm of my hand. There were so few of them. I split them in 2 halves, sending one half to the Council of Agriculture's Seed Research Center to reproduce them and put samples in permanent storage. Then I asked Dr. Runguju Pachikali to bring the remaining half to 12 different indigenous communities.
Runguju Pachikele, who was previously Kuo Hua-jen's student, is Rukai. He retraced Fogg's steps to return the 96 seed varieties to indigenous villages and witnessed them be sown in the fields from which they once came. However, after this millet made the trip home, it didn't continue to thrive there.
我举例像例行部落那对夫妻，
种在他们居家旁边。
For example, there was a couple in Lixing village in Nanto's Renai township who planted the millet next to their home. When it was time to harvest it, they invited elementary school students and the village's elderly to join in. It was a very lively scene. However, later on, they didn't continue to grow that millet. That's because millet is no longer part of the community's diet, and there are imported millet options anyway.
The price of imported millet is just 1/5 of that of Taiwanese millet, and indigenous communities no longer eat the grain as a diet staple. There is also no financial motivation for communities to grow millet, as it is not an economically lucrative crop.
这边可受用的土地其实很少。
There is not much usable land here, so when more economical crops emerged, people switched to growing those. They switched to growing tomatoes, green peppers, cabbage, and even string beans. These crops can be more quickly sold.
The millet seed's journey home is a touching story, but reality is far less romantic. The question now is whether these crops are fated to disappear once again. In March, the National Taiwan University decided to grow 28 of the millet varieties saved by fog in its experimental forest in Nantou County.
台大实验呢有一个这共荣的计划，我们希望我们身为在地的一份子。
We have a co-prosperity plan at NTU's experimental forest. We hope that as part of the local community, we can fulfill the university's social responsibilities while cooperating with the financial institution that helps fund us. We have planted about half a hectare of the millet seeds in our nursery and in Dongpu in the Xingyi township. We think of this not as part of our job, but rather as an important mission.
Four months later, Chen and his family, who are the only ones near the experimental forest with experience growing millet, came by to help the NTU researchers harvest the crop.
黑色的就可以摘了。
After the harvest, researchers tag each of the 28 varieties of millet with a serial number for their records.
We look at how well each variety grows, so we can select the type most suited to this growing region.
Compared with 10 years ago when the millet was first brought home to Taiwan, conditions for the crop are much better now thanks to NTU researchers' findings, as well as interest among younger farmers in growing it.
条树头上面，它就是告诉小米说，你要赶快生长，跟茅草一样强壮。
Xingyi Township's Jiumei Elementary School has roughly 50 students from local Zhou and Bunun communities. The school has developed a course to teach these students how to grow millet, so they can understand how their ancestors lived. It hopes that through the course, the students will gain a respect for nature.
这个意思就是告诉小米神说，将来小米收成的时候，我们会跟鱼一起吃。
或许有的人在种小米，它是一种食农教育吧，但是我觉得我们在种小米，它是一个民族教育。
Maybe for some people, learning how to grow millet would be a lesson in farming. However, for these children, it is a lesson in cultural heritage. We notice that kids come out of the lessons with greater self-confidence because they learn where they come from. They know that this process of growing millet contains within it a great deal of philosophical meaning and a great deal of knowledge.
2022 was a year of great effort, with the NTU experimental forest planting the millet seeds, companies providing financial support, and an elementary school teaching classes on growing the crop. To prevent these efforts from going to waste, the experimental forest administrators even sought ways of increasing the value of millet in Taiwan as a commercial crop. The forest's deputy director Wei Qiang commissioned the help of NTU professor Lai Ximei to help him find solutions.
我们现在知道最常见的一个就是小米粥。
The most common uses of millet we see now are millet congee and millet wine. However, if you're just going to continue doing the same old things, then the added value of this crop won't be very high. We have to give it new meaning, a new life.
If Lai and others can find what makes millet unique, they can open the door for farmers to grow this crop and can create value for it within the market.
像这样的东西，它是小籽粒的，我会建议再把现在的观念全谷的这个概念放进来。
A grain like this is so small. The approach I would advise taking is to think of it in whole grain terms. When it comes to the functional aspects of whole grain crops, a lot of that value is in the husk. I would advise doing an analysis of its fundamental components.
现在是起头，短期的阶段，我们应该是希望能够吸引更多的原住民朋友来种。
We're in the early stage right now and planning short term. What we should be hoping for is to attract more indigenous people to grow millet. And in the medium term stage, we can cultivate these skills among more youth. As for the long term, we need to clearly structure the production chain.
These diverse millet crops have found their way back home, but whether they can contribute to Taiwan's agricultural diversity remains to be seen. Genetic diversity is crucial to a stable food supply, particularly in the face of climate change. Researchers hope they can find a place for diverse millet crops on Taiwanese tables.